Coming to you live from Central Florida, you're listening to A Neighbor's Choice with your host, as always, David Gornoski, myself in the hosting position once again. You will be seeing a lot more of this as we continue. I will be announcing something very shortly here about what I'll be doing in radio. See, it's not true. Video did not kill the radio star because radio still reaches more people than TV. And when you have a world of Facebook and Twitter and so forth, which are trying to stifle opinion by suppressing alternative views with their algorithms, we're going to bypass these little purple-haired gatekeepers and go straight to the broadcast airwaves in conjunction with the publications that are already carrying my work. And those are sites like Daily Caller, Town Hall Finance, the Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, the American Conservative, Intellectual Takeout, ChristianPost.com, LouRockwell.com, Ron Paul Liberty Report picks up some of my stuff. So we're going to have the online collection of publications pushing out my columns, in addition to a new radio show that I'll be starting at one of the top major markets in broadcast on the FM dial, and I'll be talking about that here shortly. But I will be continuing to do my print articles at these different publications. WorldNet Daily is another great publication that always puts my work at the top of their opinion pages when they push my stuff out. And my work is very consistent. It's always about understanding the personhood revolution of Jesus. You know, I saw that movie that's out now about the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood. And I consider Mr. Rogers, like many people from my generation, to be a kind of inspirational figure. And yet, it was interesting to see the same theater that I saw the new documentary on Mr. Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor, is the name of the movie. I recommend everyone go out and see it. It's very good. But the same theater that I saw the movie in, there was an incident with Pam Bondi, who's the Attorney General for, I think she's the Attorney General for the state of Florida, and she's a Trump ally. And she went to see the movie at the same theater, and she was attacked by a vicious mob of angry leftists. And they were telling her, shame, shame, shame. And you'll notice that's the tell. Look, guys, I'm giving you the cheat code to understanding all political and cultural ideas. If you want to filter, it's a really simple cheat code. You don't have to sit there and wave your hands and say, I have no idea why people are freaking out. I'm giving you the cheat code. If you follow the frame I've given you, if you look at it through the lens of Jesus as a historical figure, you can set aside your religious views. I have a religious view about Jesus, but you don't have to have a religious view to understand the anthropological impact of what Jesus set out to do in history and what he is accomplishing in history as he predicted he would. I just posted earlier a statement that Jesus, driving the personhood revolution, he predicted, he said, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. What does that mean? Well, here's one way to understand this. The first in the ancient world for thousands and thousands of years, up until Jesus' time in history, the first was the collective. It was the national body, the tribe, the masses, the mob, the groupthink, the crowd. And the last was the person, particularly the person who has the least amount of social cachet in a community, the person who has the least amount of people representing his interest or her interests. So the first in the ancient world was the collective, the people's will, right? That whole concept of a national body, a tribe, that was one and the same with their religion and their culture. And the last in the ancient world was the person. There was no such thing as an individual dignity of the human person as a universal ethical framework. There was no such thing as that in the ancient world. No matter where you went in society around the globe, there was no concept of the person. That is the revolution that Jesus introduced into history, and it is accomplishing its work continually. Whether you are secular or not, I can show you scientific evidence of how this is unfolding in history. And if you understand that, then you understand what's happening in the age of Trump and all these other seemingly bizarre, unprecedented places that we're headed in our culture. They're not. They're very predictable. The cultural themes that are moving these different forces are very predictable. So again, the first shall be last. The first in the ancient world that Jesus enters history into, the first was the collective, the people, the crowd, and the last was the individual person and his right to not be messed with, his right to have human dignity, his right to not be sacrificed for the glory of the collective, whether it be a nation or ethnicity or what have you. And he said, the last shall be first, the first shall be last. And in the West, where his story has been able to percolate and develop in the most consistent way. And what I mean by that is we in the West have had because of the Gutenberg press, everybody has a text about the Bible. And they're all influenced by the Bible in one way or another. Whatever your religious background is, we're influenced by the Bible. And that textual, let's call it textual familiarity, that is the backbone of our culture, that is shaping our framework of the dignity of individuals against the will of the crowd. Do you see what I'm saying here? The will of the crowd was the only will that mattered in human history. And now, because of 2,000 years of Jesus deconstructing the will of the crowd, we have a new concept that's very unique to the West. It's called the dignity of the human person. Another word for it is the sovereignty of the individual. It's the idea that the founders and other people in Western tradition have played off of, which is that every human being is endowed with dignity and that you have no right to use violence against another individual to have your way over them. And furthermore, you have no right to sacrifice any human person, no matter how weak they are, no matter what their disability might be, no matter how rich or poor they might be, no matter how crude their language might be, no matter how unpopular their ideas might be, no matter what their creed, their color, their gender, or lack thereof, you have no right and no ability to use violence against them, to have your way over them, to coerce them, to get them to think or act or feel the way you do. That is the essence of Jesus's personhood revolution. And if you miss that, you won't understand the craziness of our society. Because right now we're going through a process, a 2,000-year process of repentance, of what does that word repentance mean? Don't be scared of that word repentance. I'm not preaching at you. Don't worry. Repentance means changing your mind. It means to have one perspective, which is, you mean I can hurt people if I get a large group of people to join me? That was the old way before the personhood revolution. And now, because we have the personhood revolution that Jesus inaugurated, now we can say, oh, wait. Do not resist evil with violence. That's what Jesus, he said. That's what you're going to do if you're going to be like me. You're not going to resist evil with violence. That means if you think your neighbor's a little too rich and a little too greedy and a little bit too stingy with his wages or his income, you don't get to resist that evil with violence. You don't get to put a gun to his head and say, I will force you to be kind to the least of these. No, there's no, where is the asterisk there, folks? Where is the asterisk in Jesus's command to his imitators, those who want to use his name as their identity? Christian, little Jesus, right? Where is the asterisk that says you can resist evil with violence on these issues? So when Jesus confronts the woman in adultery, right? That adultery isn't evil. Adultery can create all kinds of social breakdown, social dissolution, social chaos, right? And yet Jesus says, he who is without sin cast the first stone. Now I ask you, has a heroin user done more violence than an adulterer into society, right? Those things are both, if you're addicted to heroin, the heroin addiction is a kind of evil, right? In adultery, breaking apart a family for passion is a kind of evil, correct? Guess what? If you want to use the name Christian, that means you have to imitate the title of the guy. You have to imitate what he told you have to do if you want to be like him. And he says, do not resist evil with violence. And that's what we're working out 2,000 years later. We're still plodding along, trying to get it right, trying to figure it out. This is not an easy task for a human species that had thousands of years of being locked into one giant groupthink of national body preservation to expunge. As the high priest Caiaphas said when he tried to execute Jesus, he said, "It is better, don't you know?" He told his fellow leaders, he said, "It is better. It is expedient," one text says. "It is expedient that one man die, than the whole nation perish." That right there, my friends, is the ancient world form of justice. It's better that one individual, one person gets screwed than the whole nation perish if we let that person exercise their freedom. And so Jesus' story has been infecting us, even though the church gets it wrong. It's not about that. It's not about, this is the problem I have with people who say, well, what about the church is evil? Yeah, you're assuming that Jesus is creating another ideology in which he commands people what to do. But you're thinking too much like the old pagan way. Jesus gives you a radical choice. Love your neighbor as yourself. That means first, love yourself so that you know how to love your neighbor. If you hate yourself, you will hate your neighbor. So you have to love yourself. Love yourself as a person, not as a collective cog in a collective machine. And secondly, after you love yourself, you love your neighbor from that mirror of love. That's the foundational framework by which you can then change society, by seeing each person and calling them out of the spells of groupthink, whether they're racially groupthink or gender groupthink or attacks on gender groupthink or any kind of collective identity. It's like a hypnotic groupthink spell, and it grabs people and it breaks their ability to go forward into history under the personhood revolution, which says no act of aggression should ever befall an individual person, no matter how big or small. Now, the left, they have a problem with that. The left, now I'm not saying, my friend David Dark, he always tells me to call them the Legion because he says some people on the left are with you. And I'm like, okay, so Legion, they tend to think that, well, we can implement love of the least of these through force. And so we can't allow freedom to work itself out. We can't allow persuasion and associations and markets and all of these nonviolent mechanisms we have to sort our problems out. We can't allow that to be the final say over, getting people to stop being greedy or stingy or racist or whatever. We have to force them through the state to put a gun to them and say, you shall bake the cake, or you shall pay more to your wage employees, or you shall support Solyndra, the solar panel company, because if you don't support Solyndra by force, God forbid, we won't have their beautiful technology. Of course, that company went bankrupt. But anyways, that's the way the left processes the Christian revelation, the personhood revelation. They kind of tend to say, well, I want to hurry it up. I want to speed it up. So I want to take a shortcut to heaven that actually leads to hell. The heaven they have in mind is the respect for the least of these. And I think there is something beautiful about some of the core ideas culturally of the left. That is, you shouldn't make fun of people. You shouldn't be hateful to people. If someone is having a problem with gender identity, you shouldn't bully them, right? And the Christian framework is the framework that we should operate and empathize with people and say, you shouldn't bully someone if they have a gender confusion. Don't bully someone. Don't treat them like dirt. For goodness gracious, come on. Jesus forgave his enemies on the cross when they were whipping him 66 times. If he can forgive his enemy that's whipping him 66 times naked and choking him and suffocating him on a cross, Can't you love those who you don't understand or love those who you disagree with? And so we have to understand there is something about the less cultural impetus, that is, don't be mean and don't bully people. That's something beautiful that we shouldn't make fun of. But at the same time, we cannot accept the left's reliance on state violence to enforce that empathy through the barrel of a gun. Because when we do that, we're falling back into the old pagan way of doing things, which is that might makes right. If I get enough people to do it with me, like if I get 50 million voters to pass a law to raise taxes, it's okay. If I went up to my neighbor myself with a posse in the neighborhood with a bunch of guns and said, hey, we want you to pay for this new playground, and we know you're richer than the rest of us, so we're going to put a gun to your head and tell you cough up the cash, or else we'll put you in a cage with violent people. Ooh, that's what tax systems are. You didn't know that? I mean, of course we know that. We just don't want to look at it like that. But you can't do that as a group. But somehow we think if we have 50 million voters do it with us and say it's justice, somehow that makes it okay. No, it's not. So that's what's happening right now with half the country, or it's not half the country, by the way. I want to make something clear here. I tell people don't vote because voting tends to end up in violence. Now, if there's an amendment that says legalize marijuana, that's a nonviolent act. So I think you could put a vote in for that and you're not doing any violence. And I think if you have a candidate like Ron Paul who says, I'm going to end these violent laws, then that's an act of nonviolence to vote for those types of people and laws. But otherwise, I don't think we should be voting most of the time. I think most of the time we're just perpetuating violence in the pagan sense. We're just hiring people to, at large, do something that we ourselves would find disgusting to carry out ourselves, right? Using violence to get our way over nonviolent people who aren't trying to hurt us. Having said that, though, there is this sense that the whole country is in this meltdown mode over Trump. And the reason they're in a meltdown is because for years we've grown up in a society in which we were told that you can imitate the rhetoric of a Mr. Rogers and keep on doing the same old wars and keep on doing the same old power grabs, the same old greed campaigns in politics. And it's okay as long as you imitate basically the framework of a Mr. Rogers, which most politicians kind of play that kind of angle, right? They say, I'm for the people, and I'm going to help people, and I'm going to be, they always start off a story by saying, I was just a young boy just like you. I grew up in a little town near Idaho. It was off the map, wasn't even registered in any state. Such a poor little manger I was born in. And I am just like you, and therefore I will protect you. I will be your safety net. I will be your avenger, right? It's just silly stuff. Many people for decades grew up listening to that, and they really believe that. They really believe the TV show called Politics. They really believed it with all their heart. They believed that the state was benevolent, and as long as they got the vote, that made it benevolent somehow. I don't know how they figured out a popularity contest somehow makes something right, but anyways, that's the kind of groupthink, pagan-style mentality that we've been wrestling with, and some people wrestle with it more than others. And so there's a lot of people who they've been told that if you talk like Mr. Rogers, you can still be a narcissistic, egotistical central planner that wants to run your life and control you and command the economy and make you obedient little tax slaves and make you go to government schools, one size fits all school, one size fits all medical care that doesn't solve anything, doesn't actually heal the diseases they're promising to heal, one size safety net, one size charity mechanism through taxes. They wanted to make your life so commanded and so you just submit to them and they'll rule you, right? And they thought they could get away with it as long as they used politically correct speech codes, to be kind, to use gentle rhetoric, to use smooth talk that makes you feel cozy and comfortable. And for a long time it worked. And then Trump came along. And Trump, he does not hide his wealth. He glories in his wealth. He does not hide his kind of crude language towards women. He glories in it. So he played a bad guy on TV for decades, and no one thought that a bad guy of crude language like Trump would ever be allowed to sit in the sacred halls of the benevolent state. No one thought that would ever happen. They thought that was just a little, joke, and it would never be taken seriously. So half the country is losing their mind because they've been imitating political role models for decades. in their own life. They've been saying, oh, as long as I gesture my language and gesture my my little buzzwords and gesture my virtue signaling and everything to be in line with speech that is very, very sensitive to racial minorities or female issues or all these little collectivist categories that they create. As long as I use my language to be very sensitive and affirming to those people with my language, I can still be a cheating, stealing, lying, coercing, manipulative person in my way of moving up the social status pecking order, the hierarchy. But the Trump thing ruined that, because now the guy who sits at the very highest level of the pecking order of people who believe in the state as the supreme being of our culture, now they have a heretic in the White House. Now, I know that he's still affirming state power. That's a whole other conversation. But I'm trying to explain to you why people really can't figure out what's going on. They're having what we call, in Christian terms, an apocalyptic unveiling. An apocalyptic unveiling. What does that word mean? Well, it doesn't mean what Left Behind's talking about. It means something much more interesting, something much, much more relevant to understanding why the world is the way it is. An apocalyptic unveiling is revealing the way power structures actually operate by a performative experience, by something that you see visually through art, through someone's performance art, through someone's role in culture as a witness to something that was before him or her left unseen, left unknown. And that, in this case, is that because Trump does not use the violence and the vulgarity, hiding language of politically correct, affirming speech, because he glories in himself as a hero and a winner in an age in which you're supposed to pretend to be a weakling in order to hide your violence, coercive interests. Because he doesn't play the political language the way it's supposed to be played, it is really like a heretic has seized the glorious, beautiful, benevolent state, and everything he's doing now feels like a nightmare. And so people are actually codependent on Trump. They're codependent on the media and on the Trump monster that the media is trying to scare them about every day. So it is still a TV experience, and Trump is a TV creature, which is perfect because people who are really obsessed with obeying what the TV media tells them, they're really in a sore spot here. They're in a tough spot because they've got a guy who is obsessed with the TV just like they are. So he's a mere double of them, right? But he does not affirm the language and gesture and rhetoric that makes them feel like what they were told. Look, if you use PC codes, if you say I love the people and I love all genders and all these little PC language, and you affirm toxic stuff and all that, you use the little bumper sticker slogans, then you can still be a cheating, killing, bombing, drone striking person like Obama and all those people. You can do all that, but you have to hide the violence that you do, the power and domination and egotistical arrogance of central planning through the rhetoric of, it's a Christian imitating rhetoric of the least of these, right? And Trump doesn't play that game. He doesn't play the least of these game. And so it unveils the vulgarity and the brutality and the stupidity of relying on the state to run your lives all along. So this is like an atheistic moment, man. This is like losing that song, Losing My Religion. Millions of people are in the process of having their religion lost because a monster in their eyes like Trump is in the sacred halls of what they thought was a benevolent, sacred institution, the state. And that if they could imitate the people in the state by using sensitive language and soaring rhetoric, that they could get ahead in life too. And now they're seeing that everything they've been taught for decades on television, it didn't work. In fact, the opposite of it worked. Blaspheming the speech codes is what Trump got into the White House for. It was an act of extreme apostasy. That's what was going on. An extreme heretical reversion to the old winners' right history rhetoric of the old days before the Christian personhood revolution started to infect the very speech and gestures that we make. So those things are extremely important for people. We have to recover a proper understanding of the human person in light of the Jesus revolution in history to understand why so many people who are infected by a culture that's fully in the wrapped around the Christian aesthetic, wrapped and inculcated with Christian ethic, whether they are religious or not. You're in the thralls of it. And they're working out. Wait a second. I thought I'm supposed to be the least. I thought I'm supposed to love the least of these. And here this guy is. I thought I'm supposed to love the least of these through my mental assent to the sovereignty of the state. And if I assented to the sovereignty of the state and allowed them to use force and laws, I could help the least of these, and I could feel good about myself. And here someone comes along like Trump, and he's like, "I'm a winner. I'm not a loser. I'm not the least of these. I'm a winner, and you can be a winner like me. You could be a tough guy. You could be a strong man. You can say what you ever want to say about girls or women on TV. You can say whatever you want because I'm an Uberman," right? It's a throwback to the old order where hierarchies were more clearly understood, but they weren't questioned because they were not fully as infected with the Christian personhood revolution as we are today. And so Trump is like a throwback to the classic sacrificial violence of the old ancient world. And the left is like the modern, more cleverly imitating Christian perversion of sacrificial violence. Trump is winners write history. I'm a winner. Do you want to be a winner with me? Let's go get rich. Let's go do whatever we want to do. Let's go kick tail. Let's support law and order. Let's support the actions of police as the presumption of righteousness, rather than the victim of certain police situations. So he's a classic throwback to a winner's brand of cultural myth making in an age, in an era in which 2,000 years after Jesus's infection is more enthralled as a dominant story, the idea that you should help the least of these, that you should love the poor and love the meek, right? And he's saying, I don't want to love the poor, want to weak and the meek. I want them to be winners like me, right? And that's just a mismatch. That's a heretical mismatch of cultural identification at the highest seat of the halls of power and violence in our culture. And so by putting that heretic in that seat, it profanes, listen to this, it profanes the very purity of the state institution itself. And that's why the media and the people who really worship the state for years, they don't understand that they do, but I'll help them see it if they're willing to listen. The people who worship the state, they can't figure this out because they think, that's why they use the words like, this is a toxic person. That word toxic is poison, means poison. Or they say this is an infection by Russians, right? So there's always got to be, again, this is a pagan technique from the ancient world where you say there's some kind of spell that has been put onto the society. It's a trickery, an act. It's a lot of times they would burn witches and say that the witches had to be burned, they had to be exterminated from the community because they put people into a mass hallucination that was toxic to the tribe. Just like Trump is they're trying to position him as toxic, right? And the reason why it's failed so far is because we can't agree in light of the gospel. We can't agree on who our villains should be in society. And so you have people on the right who have been playing the victim in mass culture for decades. Cultural conservatives, people who are more heartland, down to earth, typically in the way they talk and act and think, just more common sense, kind of down to earth, older type people typically too. They've been playing the cultural victim in all the movies, music, colleges, every transmitting institution of culture in the West. They've been playing the bad guy for decades and decades and decades. And so now they get to have their punk rock moment when somebody comes in and he's a TV creature just like the left has been running the TV creature culture. And he just flips the script on them. He calls them out, calls them losers, calls them jerks, and he's winning and he's getting things done. And he's sitting in the most sacred halls of power. And so they're enjoying their anti-hero moment. Trump is Han Solo for the right. He's the guy that gets away with saying what everybody wants to say, but they've been bullied so long. They've been used to sitting in a submissive posture in culture And so they're really reveling the kind of payback moment that they feel is happening. And again, I understand that. I empathize with it, but we have to focus our eyes on the broader picture, folks. We can't get lost in playing scapegoat ping pong between the left and the right. Those who want to imitate the personhood revolution of Jesus, we have to be the adults in the room between two mirror doubles. We have to keep consistency. We can't say, well, because Trump is better on X, Y, and Z, therefore I have to just give him the benefit of the doubt if he's got a law in place that is still using state sacred violence to stop certain freedoms. Okay, you can't give Trump a pass just because we enjoy the kind of apocalyptic unveiling of the state's vulgarity. We still have to be consistent in our speech, because that's the only way you can have any moral foundation to make any substantive critique that actually lasts beyond your generation. You have to be principled, not arrogantly principled. You still have to understand people are locked in a lot of different ideas. They're not going to understand the personhood revolution overnight. I don't understand it. But we have to give grace for people who are still caught in groupthink matrices, left, right, Trump good, Trump evil, all these little basic kind of it's just mirror doubles. It means nothing really. We have to see what's good when he does something good, like he's gesturing to legalize marijuana. That's a great thing for people who are in the personhood revolution, who don't want violence to befall nonviolent people. We have to push him forward to keep moving him in that direction. Pardon nonviolent people. That's a good step in the right direction. Good idea. I say pardon every nonviolent person, no matter what, in the federal registry. That's the Christian stance, that if you were actually following Jesus and you were president and you actually understood what that actually meant, to imitate the man who says, don't resist evil with violence, then you would carte blanche pardon every nonviolent offender in the federal purview that you could immediately, day one. Because the idea of putting someone in a cage for a nonviolent behavior and leaving him in there away from their family and letting them sit in there with people who are actually violent sociopaths, who have long since, because of alienation and other violent cycles, hardened into a violent person, to put any nonviolent person, a person who has committed no violent act, to put him in a cage with violent people is the most inhumane, disgusting, garbage concept you could ever really conceive of in the modern world. And it's a holdover of the pre-Christian pagan way of sacrificing the one to make the many feel good, to channel the many, the collective's wrath and guilt and shame and jealousy onto the misfit. And that's exactly what's happening with things like the drug war. That is an act of jealousy, really, by the collective. It's saying, who do you think you are to get to express your freedom in such a wild, audacious way as to do a drug or chemical which the state collective, the state religion has said is taboo? Who do you think you are, young person, to do a chemical which will alter your mind in a state that the state religion has said you shall not touch it, or you will experience the hell of violence that we bring on you? So there's a sense in which people go along with that as a collective, because there is a little bit of jealousy there. There's a lot of jealousy there. Well, who are you that you get to exercise your freedom, even if it's in a bad thing? If you're addicted to heroin, there's not a lot of freedom in that, right? There's a lot of bondage to that we have to help people work through, person to person, as Jesus imitators would do. But there's this jealousy that's rooted in the cultural appetite for things like drug laws, because in some sense they're existentially jealous of the fact that someone else gets to have a little bit of more freedom, rebellious spirit, and meanwhile they're stuck being scared, fearful, submissive, compliant, cookie cutter people. And so there's a sense in which, oh, you've got something I want to have the freedom to do that. Oh, you get to do it. Oh, therefore, I'm going to cast you into the belly of hell called the prison state, and in kind of glee, and have a little bit of cathartic moment. But that's the way they did in the ancient world. They would sacrifice people who were breaking taboo codes, were breaking holy speech codes, breaking, they were dining with people above their hierarchy. There's all kinds of taboo codes that could get you really whipped or broken or beaten, choked, stolen, murdered, thrown off a cliff. There was a lot of ways to do that. And because of the personhood revolution, we've cleaned up a lot of the more vulgar, outright versions of sacrifice in the West. And the cultures around the globe in the East have been imitating the West, and so they have, in osmosis sense, been able to clean up some of their sacrificial practices as well. And the more textually invaded they become with stories related to the Christian personhood revolution, the dignity of every individual and how they are first, not the collective. The collective is last. We're reversing this, see, in history. The more Asian cultures and Eastern cultures are infected with the personhood revolution ethics, the more they will slowly wean away from collective violence and towards the dignity of every human person as a universal presumption. And the West is on the forefront of this because we've had a longer uninterrupted time being infected culturally with the aesthetic, that is the art, the symbols, the signs of the gospel stories, and then the ethic, the outworking of, okay, so if I'm not supposed to resist evil with violence, and if God loves every person and he makes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, therefore I'll create habeas corpus, right to a fair trial. I'll create innocent until proven guilty. I'll create a jury trial system in which the jury, the neighborhood, is supposed to be able to protect against tyranny from coming upon an innocent individual. So that's the hallmark of the Christian infection. And the Jewish texts are part of that Christian story. It's all one story. And those have always infected the West for 2,000 years, even when the church didn't get it right. And so that's kind of where we're at. So where does this tie into with Mr. Rogers and Trump? Well, Mr. Rogers, again, is an icon of being sensitive, of loving your neighbor, of being kind to the least of these. And that's a beautiful thing. And we all have to practice that as individual persons. But the moment we take that Mr. Rogers neighborhood rhetoric and use it to perpetuate more state central command power, which uses coercion against nonviolent, victimless people, the more we are trying to keep in place the pagan sacrificial mechanism that Jesus broke and destroyed and ripped apart for all of us to see in history. The more we cling to, it's okay to use violence to manage healthcare. We can have one-size-fits-all command healthcare from the state. That's violence. You can't do that, okay? You got to let people have the freedom to market and sell and figure out what medicines or health frameworks work best for them. And if there's someone that's doing fraud, in a market-free society, there's a place for recourse. There's a place for tort. There's a place for suing for liability. And there's a place to weed those kind of fraudulent people out of the market through nonviolent respect for private association, private contract, and profit and loss. If you're selling mayonnaise in a jar and labeling it vitamin C, that's fraud. And in our free market, you don't need an FDA to figure that out. If you believe you need an FDA to figure out how to keep people from selling mayonnaise in a jar labeled vitamin C, then, I'm sorry, but you're one of the most faithful, subservient people I can think of for assuming that the state is the benevolent, godlike force in society. They're not. There is no difference between a group of people called a state and a group of people called a neighborhood, a charity, a company, a corporation. It's just groups of people. And people in groups tend to do groupthink type things. Some of these things can be good. Some of these things can be bad. But all human beings are motivated by some kind of self-interest. Even if it's an altruistic form, even if it's taking the bullet for your neighbor, you're still interested in performing that which yourself desires to do. And so every human being is enraptured by a framework of self-interest, whether you are a government bureaucrat or politician, or whether you're someone who works in the nonviolent sphere of life through charity companies or associations, any kind of group or body or club is the same kind of thing. It's a corporate body. So governments are a form of corporate bodies. Governments are a corporate body. But the difference between a corporate body in the state and a corporate collective body in the free world is that the state has legal immunity to initiate aggression to dominate and submit people who are not doing anything violence. They haven't produced a victim. They're minding their own business. They want to keep the fruits of their own labor. And then the government comes along and says, we're going to take it and we're going to distribute it the way we want it. Or we're going to force you to sell this kind of medicine and not that kind of medicine. We're going to force you to hire this kind of person, even though you're a hateful, terrible person. And people should be able to know in a free society, oh, that guy's really hateful and discriminatory. He's not just hiding it through the force of the state law, right? And so the state tries to impose a kind of totalitarian perversion of the gospel of loving people as yourself and treating people that are weaker or hurt or excluded or minorities. There's less minorities than there is a majority. That's in any country you go to, right? In Saudi Arabia, if you're a Chinese person, you are not going to be treated as on the same equal dignity as a Saudi Arabian person, right? Because that's the hierarchical, kind of a sacrificial structure of society that they're more steeped into. But over here, we in the West, because we're infected with the personhood revolution of Jesus, we understand that there's a presumption that every human being, as Martin Luther King would say, Martin Luther King said everyone should have a colorblind society. The idea that human beings should be treated with basic sacred acts of love and mercy, not sacrifice, right? That's something uniquely found in our society. But we can't force that through coercion, because the moment we do, first of all, it doesn't work. It doesn't bind us together. Obviously, millions of people in America disagree with government health care, with government mandates on medicine through the FDA, through government mandates on taxes and business choices. There's millions of people that disagree. And so you can't do what the pagan world did, which was to bind the community together. You cannot bind a community together and have communal order when half the country is saying, I call BS, man. I don't think I need an FDA to tell me what medicine I want to take. I don't think I need a tax-funded university system to tell me what's true about the world. I think I can have other forms of education. I don't think I need a government grant system that's taking loot stolen from the collective and dishing it out to favored friends and ideas. I don't think I need that to understand physics. In fact, I think it actually retards the natural process of scientific revolutions, which it does. I don't need a state nanny to tell me how big my cup size can be for my drink. I don't need a state nanny to tell me who can get married and who can't. I don't need a state nanny to tell me that we have to go kill some country overseas that hasn't touched us, hasn't bothered us. See, this is sacred violence. It's the old pagan way. If you're an imitator of Jesus, whether you're religious or not, you see clearly what this is. You see this as a reversion to the old, ancient, stinky, ugly, broken, dumb, ugly, stinky. It stinks. That's one thing you got to remember. The pagan world stinks in the light of the gospel. It stinks. It's stupid. It's outdated. It doesn't work. You cannot use sacred violence to initiate public order. We don't buy it. And so as we continue to divide, right? I think Clarence Thomas said recently, the flag doesn't bind us together anymore, right? But there's a reason for this stuff. It's because we're losing our religion, folks. We're losing the sacred violence religion that our states were bound by for thousands of years. And it's all coming to an apocalyptic reckoning. It's all coming to an awakening, folks. We are losing our state religion and we don't know what's happening. And so a lot of people are freaking out. But we have to be kind. We have to be merciful neighbors to these people. We got to work with them where they're at, try to grow, kind of move them gently. But you got to be confident. It's a paradox. Everything you do in Christianity is a paradox between rock solid confidence, unwavering confidence. You don't flinch in front of them. Never, by the way, flinch in front of a mob. Never flinch and apologize to a social justice mob. They are locked in a violent, hypnotic state. Do not apologize. You will always get more violence. Just like in the ancient world, they couldn't burn the witch until the witch said, "Yeah, I'm guilty of of burning of witches and stuff, of witchcraft." Right? So they always had to get a confession to legitimize their nasty, ugly, stinky state collective violence against the witch. And it's the same way it is today. And it's even on the right too. You know, there's some people that, they get into that same patriotic version of of political correctness, where it's like, oh, if you're not worshiping the flag. Look, you can respect people's love for the flag. I don't really care about symbols one way or the other. You can respect that, but don't try to, belittle people who, don't worship the flag and get goosebumps when they see a flag. The flag is a symbol of the state. Jesus was executed as an enemy of the state. Okay, so there's a little bit of a paradox that we have to hold in tension as imitators of Jesus. We don't press a button and turn off statist culture tomorrow, but we have to be role models that people want to imitate, to give people a guiding path out of the stupid process of sacrificial cycles and might makes right, and numbers legitimize wicked things that we don't do as persons. We have to break that through by telling stories that show how ugly and stupid such an idea is, by giving a voice to the victims of state violence, by giving a voice to people who've been locked in cages for victimless behaviors, giving a voice to people who've been drone bombed in overseas campaigns that were elective issues, not life or death self-defense measures by our government. We have to give these people a voice. We have to be confident and yet humble. That's the paradox of a Christian. Christians embrace paradox. Ideologues hate paradox. Ideologues flip their lid when you bring up paradox. They want absolutism, state violence. If the president says go to war, we go to war. That's stupid collective stuff. We're growing up from that. We're moving on up from that. We don't need that kind of old-fashioned, outdated concept to function as people. And even if we could do it, we can't, because it doesn't bind us together anymore. And if you can't be bound together, that's what the word religion means, to be bound together. The good old religion of statism and nationalism, both of them are not binding us together. Half of the country wants a globalist flavored, open borders, totalitarian nanny state to take care of people and make them feel good and make them feel like they're doing something by hiring states to steal money from their neighbors to give it to poor people. Half the country really believes that. And half the country believes that if we can just get it back to America, put America's flag here first and then the Christian flag here second, right? Like a lot of people do, that somehow that's going to solve their problems. None of those things are going to solve the problems, because those are false idols. And the great thing about apocalypse is you can't put that idol back on its perch once you've seen it for what it is. That's the beautiful thing about the master of history, Jesus. Once he exposes your idol, once he tears the veil of the temple, tears it in half, and you go inside that temple and you see, oh, there's nothing here. So that means God didn't want to murder Jesus. It was actually just a petty, whipped up crowd that was jealous of Jesus and whipped up by fear and resentment by local leaders that were jealous of him too. Once you realize that's the heart of all collective acts of violence, then you can't unsee that. You can't put the cat back in the bag, right? But we have to be kind to our neighbors who are in the process of going through this repentance process. It's a process of transformation of the mind. We have to be gloriously nice to them. Don't be hateful to people who are still stuck on stupid, because we are all stuck on stupid in some ways, right? We're all, even if we're great voluntarists and great nonviolent practitioners when it comes to society, there's always ways that as individuals we fall short. We get sucked into covetousness and envy and jealousy and all those kinds of things. And it's a process that takes wisdom and maturity and good role models. That's so important. You have to be the role model to change hundreds of people's lives in your life. And with Twitter and Facebook and all these other platforms that are now available to you, you have the real ability to influence people as good role models with your life, as a vessel of beauty and a vessel of grace. You have that within your power to plant a seed of nonviolence, of mercy, not sacrifice. Who said that? Mercy, not sacrifice. That's your mantra. Mercy on yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Mercy on those around you, and mercy on those in the collective, those who don't understand what you understand. So if you're a leftist person and you say, you know what, I want the rich to give more money to the poor, then talk to them as your neighbors. Love them as you would love yourself. Don't do what you would do don't do that which you would not want done to you, okay? If you have a rich neighbor who you think's a little greedy, go to him, write him a letter if he's a celebrity, and talk to him. Create a campaign if you want to pressure him to give money to the poor, but don't use other people called police as your little personal scapegoat to go do your dirty deed by enforcing redistribution mechanisms that, first of all, aren't going to make your neighbor have a heart of compassion. It's going to make him resentful. It's going to make him feel the pull of being a scapegoat because he's being forced to give it. So you got to harden his heart instead of softening his heart, his or her, because there's rich billionaire women too and millionaires, right? So you're gonna, if you try to take money through force, and you're gonna harden that neighbor's heart, make him more cynical, not create a mirror of love and self-giving and creative thought for the poor. So you don't take things through force. You work with them through persuasion. You go into market. If you have to do a boycott because they're doing something really hateful or nasty, if they're being racist, do a boycott, whatever. If you want to do that, go ahead. But don't use coercion, and don't browbeat people, and don't project your personal shame because you've got some racial issues onto your neighbor because you're jealous of them because they're richer than you or more successful than you or more popular than you. Get off of that. That's not what it means to be a member of the personhood revolution, which Jesus is started 2,000 years ago, and it's still continuing to this day. We have the ability right now to solve the problems of our world together without using sacrificial violence. Sacrificial violence won't work. It does not bind us together, folks. It does not unite people who have been awakened by the revolution that Jesus has started, and you cannot put that cat back in the bag. The new era of personhood is coming, and it won't be stopped by any army or any bad idea or ideology. It doesn't matter whether you are going to quibble over metaphysics. There's an anthropological reality that you got to get caught up on, my friends. Jesus is in control of history. He's moving it all forward, and there's nothing we can do about it. We have two choices. We can imitate him the hard way, or we can imitate him the easy way. The hard way is the way we've been doing it, where we say we love Jesus, but we hate our neighbor. That's the hard way of doing it. The easy way of doing it is to renounce the lie that your desires are your own. Renounce the lie that your desires are a product of your heart rather than the product of your neighbor that you want to be like. Renounce that lie. Reject that lie. Let go of that false myth that was constructed by human deceit, and understand that those desires are not of your own, but they're desires whipped up by envy and jealousy, and they don't exist if you really look at them for what they are. They're just false promises that never satisfy. Renounce that lie. And then the second thing is renounce the idea that you have the right to use collective violence against someone because you don't like the way they speak. You don't like the way they use their money. You don't like the way they vote. You don't like the way they handle this issue in their life or what kind of medicine they use. You have never had a right to use violence against anybody who has not hurt you. You have to renounce that lie. So you renounce the lie that your desires are fully concocted of your own heart. You renounce the lie that you have any right to touch a single hair on a neighbor in an aggressive fashion or steal a single penny from him. You have no right. None of us have any right in the light of the personhood revolution. We only have the neighbor's choice to love our neighbor as ourselves, or to try to slink back to the lie of the evil one, which is that we have some kind of prerogative to use might makes right. We don't. There is no might make right. There is no God in the temple of the state. It's an empty, broken, fake sacrificial mechanism. It's broken. It's dead. And we have every freedom in our ability to change everything. We can have clean energy. There are things I wish I could get into, folks, but I can't do it all yet. But there are things out there that are going to solve the things that the state has been promising to solve and has failed at for a long time. Things that don't require government bailouts, things that don't require subsidies to provide energy. We can have clean energy, pollution-free energy without having any federal government law to get it there. We don't need any Paris Climate Accord garbage. This is all Mickey Mouse fake imitation. There are real people in life, in the world, providing innovations that will solve the energy problems we have so we don't have to have wars for oil anymore. We have those. Those people are out there doing that, and they don't need your handout. They don't need Big Daddy the state. That's an old, outdated, dumb idea. That's a pagan 20,000-year-old. That's ancient stuff. It's stinky. It's like an old, stinky, musty, dumb idea called central planning. You don't need that to get real energy introduced. You don't need that to get real healthcare introduced. You don't need a central state. They got it all wrong. I mean, I don't like this stuff, this Bernie Sanders idea that we have to give government control of all medicine. First of all, government has too much control of medicine right now. But this idea that, if we give a free single-payer system, then we can still keep doing chemo and radiation, which don't work, and it'll be free. Yeah, that's the stupidest. Isn't it the dumbest thing you've ever heard? They don't even have the right. They don't even have the right nutrition paradigm. I mean, the food pyramid is so dumb and so backwards. And we think Bernie and these little Pied Piper imitators of him, they think that they can't even get the food pyramid right. You want to give those special interest captured fools that get a stupid food pyramid wrong for decades, keeping people sick and unhealthy, and you want those guys to have full control over how to deal with the crap they created with their lying food pyramid? What dumb idea is this, folks? But see, we have to be gracious with these people, but firm, and not give them 1 inch to get one more act of state violence. We have no place for that. It's not going to work. It won't bind us together. We can solve all the issues. There's revolutions going on with mitochondrial frameworks for cancer. And if we could just have a little bit of more courage to support these people on the front lines of free market research, free market skin in the game. They're putting their skin in the game. They're not saying, oh, I'm Mr. Rogers, but I'm stealing your money to go pay for my healthcare thing that I'll never figure out because I'm stuck on stupid and groupthink. No, they're solving the problem themselves by having the courage and the boldness to go outside of the university system and find those solutions that actually work for treating cancer or diabetes or Alzheimer's. They're putting their skin in the game, their risk. That's self-sacrifice, folks. To put your neck on the line, to put your reputation on the line, to put your name on the line, to put your finances on the line, and then to bring other people to put their skin in the game as a market actor, that is self-sacrifice. Now, of course, there's a lot of greedy people in it, just like there's greedy people in bureaucracies, in states. It's not an argument. But there's real people putting self-sacrificial courage on the line to get their skin in the game and give you cures that would cost pennies for real big chronic illnesses. And if you keep relying on the state, I don't care if it's the Trump version of a microwave healthcare, state law still controlling your medical care, don't rely on that false god. Do the research. Go find out. There are creative alternatives coming down the pipeline, all kinds of rethinking of mitochondrial paradigms for all kinds of health solutions that are going to blow the water. And you're going to look back and you're going to say, my goodness, I can't believe we are almost convinced to give the state more power. That old, stinky, outdated institution, more power over our healthcare choices. Goodness, we just had a little courage. We had a little more creativity, a little more self-reliance, a little more love of our neighbor, a little more skin in the game ourselves, rolled up our sleeves, and we found that we could cure cancer for a couple dollars, maybe a treatment. Don't need no government health care, boy. We don't need no Bernie health care. That's some stupid, backwards crap that's falsely imitating the love of the neighbor of Jesus. You cannot love your neighbor with a barrel of the gun. Bernie, you cannot love your neighbor through the barrel of the gun, sir. And you got to stop that lie. You cannot do it to save yourself. You got to repent of that lie, Bernie friends. You cannot use the violence of the state to love your neighbor. That is an abomination of everything we know about love and mercy and grace. The personhood revolution has changed who's in charge, and we're not going back, folks. We're going full steam ahead. We're going to solve the big problems of our time. We're going to solve energy. We're going to solve rare earth minerals. We're going to solve pollution. We're going to solve medical problems, chronic illnesses that we didn't even think were ever going to be solved as long as we stayed in this stupid government, maladjusted, idiotic, retarded paradigm of medicine. We're going to break through from that, and we're going to solve these problems. We're going to heal people. We're going to heal people of diseases, and we're going to make things like cancer and diabetes and heart disease and Alzheimer's a thing of the past. They're going to be like scurvy one day. I promise you, if we have the power to have the courage to love people as persons and to roll our sleeves up, put our neck on the line, and fight for freedom and for free information, we can solve these problems ourselves. And we will look back at this time and we'll see it as a silly little dark age that we can close the window on very quickly. I'm not promising some perfect golden age. I'm saying that Jesus has given us everything we need to subdue and cultivate the land, to make it work for us, to not have plagues of diseases. Can you imagine all these people fighting over racial and gender and all this stuff? What would happen if we solved cancer tomorrow, that nobody thought about it, that we thought about it like scurvy? We'd solve so much resentment, so much anger, so much tension, so much death anxiety would just go, relax, right? If we just solved that issue, we'd have just culture-wide a sigh of relief. But you have to have the freedom and courage to question group think. Question the group think of physics, question the group think of medical paradigms, question the group think of the food paradigm, of the food pyramid paradigm. Question it with courage and with dignity and walk on that water. Walk on the water of social alienation and social pressure to conform to stupid old ideas. And when you do that, you'll see that the whole world is in your path forward, that the whole world is beautiful, it's glorious, and that we can all do our part to love our neighbor as ourselves. So that's it for today. But remember, a neighbor's choice. Mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy, not going back to the days of central planning for collective will. That's over, folks.